channel, if you have recently watched our Meet Our Baby video, then you would notice that we literally have not done anything since we filmed that video. Derek just asked if we should change shirts, and I said no. We're not about that pretending life around here. No.
And we have like a very minute window that we can normally film these short sit-down videos, which is while Eloise is napping.
Yeah, at 17 months, she is all over the place, and she is very talkative. I'll put it that way. She's very loud.
Yes.
So anyways, today we wanted to sit down and film our birth story, or I guess it is our birth story.
Yeah.
The three of us together. We did not vlog the birth. It was kind of the plan not to. I did expect to maybe film some clips more than what we did. I have one clip that we filmed when we were on the way to the hospital, which I will insert that at some point in time. But other than that, that's all we have. Even in the days following, we just did not film.
Right. It was a very hectic situation.
Yeah, it was a very stressful situation. I will say that if you are currently pregnant and getting ready to have a baby, and you deal with a lot of fear or anxiety about delivery and labor, maybe don't watch this video.
Or come back to it after you have
because I don't want to like instill fear in anyone. This is just my experience, and looking back I can see a lot of the reasons why it went this way, but it was very traumatic for me. And even almost a month out, I do feel better about it. I've had more time to process it and everything, but for what, at least a week and a half after, I was really, really emotional about it. I feel okay to talk about it now. But up until this point, I didn't want people to ask me about it. I didn't want to, what? Oh, is it hard for you to talk about it too? Huh. I didn't want people to ask me about it. Like I seriously had a fear of like seeing friends and family after having him and people asking me questions because I just didn't want to talk about it.
No, it was, as we get into the details, you'll see. But it was a very not how we thought things would go.
And like everybody says, don't plan your birth. It's not going to go to plan. This birth was, ironically, in some ways exactly how I planned it to go. Just very painful and very traumatic, I guess. Hi, buddy. So anyways, we will go ahead and get into it. Please be kind with your comments. We made the decisions with our doctors and with our doulas as far as what the best kind of track was for us.
Right.
Everybody has to make their own decisions on what is best for them and their bodies and how to keep them and their babies safe. So anyways, leading up to his birth, I will do probably several videos on being pregnant after infertility and loss. But leading up to his birth, I was very, very anxious about a lot of things. My whole pregnancy was filled with anxiety of just trying to keep him safe and trying to keep him in as long as he could. I had prodromal labor from 29 weeks on. If you don't know what that is, a lot of people call it false labor, which technically it is because you're not actually in labor, but your body has for me, pretty painful contractions that can go on for hours and hours and hours and be very, very regular. Every 2 to 4 minutes is kind of the pattern of mine. And then as my pregnancy went on through 29 weeks, it got to be where they were almost every single day.
Right.
We went to the hospital twice, and if I had not had the contractions that I had had beforehand, we probably would have gone several more times. It's just that we knew to wait.
Right.
We also hired a birth doula. There were actually 2 of them, and they were a godsend to us because I was able to communicate with them rather than communicating with my doctor. My doctor was in the loop of everything, but as far as saying, hey, these are like the symptoms that I'm having, these are what the contractions are feeling like, and us kind of making a plan all together on when it was time to go to the hospital and when it wasn't.
And just to have the support through it all, because there were multiple nights between 29 and 39 weeks in a day, that the contractions lasted 5+ hours.
Right.
And it wasn't 5+ hours during the day. It was segments of 5 straight hours.
Right.
So I would have to come home from work, or, you know, it was in the middle of the night, so we didn't get any sleep. And they were just fantastic to, like, even with your frustration, bounce off of them
Right.
from doing it. So I would
Right.
absolutely recommend.
Right.
If you can afford to have a doula, they are 100% on your side, and they were fantastic.
So we had them, and I actually started going, I had my 20-week anatomy ultrasound with an MFM, which is a maternal fetal medicine. My doctor recommended that we go to them because of our history of infertility and kind of how I got pregnant, and just to have like the anatomy scan be even more detailed. And so at the anatomy scan, they weren't able to get like one picture of something in his heart.
Right.
And we actually ended up going back like 4 more times, and they still were not I think finally at the last
36 weeks, I think the MFM
they were
released
finally
us.
able to get it. But because of having those ultrasounds, they started to think that he was going to be a very big baby. For several ultrasounds in a row, they kept saying he's going to be so big, he's going to be big, he's measuring 2.5 weeks ahead, he's measuring 3 weeks ahead, whatever it was. And so that kind of started the process of my doctor kind of planting the seed in my head of scheduling an induction rather than just going into labor naturally, which is what the plan was.
Right.
And then adding on the prodromal labor and everything, we decided that yes, we were comfortable with being induced at 39 weeks. I was almost 4 centimeters dilated when we got to the hospital, and I was like 75% effaced. So my body was changing, it just wasn't in labor yet.
Right.
The day that we were supposed to be induced, we were supposed to be there at 5 a.m. and they kept pushing us back. We didn't actually show up until almost 2 p.m.
Yeah. They called us at
3:30.
At 3:30 a.m. told us not to come. And then they said call back at 5, so we called. And we called like 10 more times, like 5, 7.
So we weren't sleeping. We didn't sleep that day. And then we got to the hospital at 2. We didn't even start the induction until like 7.
Yeah,
is
because
when they started Pitocin.
Yeah, they couldn't find a vein either.
They couldn't
so
find a vein, and so they had to get an ultrasound team. They couldn't find his heart rate at first, which was
terrifying.
I knew that I had just felt him while we were waiting to go to get a room. But still, no matter what, like it just happened so fast. Like something can happen so fast where their heart just is not beating anymore. And so for a split second, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm literally admitted into the hospital to be induced and he doesn't have a heart rate. Like, so they had to get an ultrasound and find his heart rate.
And come to find out, they didn't actually need the ultrasound. The actual Toco monitors, the little
heart rate
circle
monitor,
pieces. The 2 we had were defective. So they got new ones, and then as soon as they put them on, it was
able
good.
to get his heart rate. So one of our 2 doulas showed up shortly after before we were even admitted, before we got a room. And so she just helped us get settled, and we started Pitocin about 7. And they upped it until they got to a 10, a level
every
10.
30 minutes until they got to
Now you can go much, much higher, but my contractions were pretty regular, and I mean, they were not super painful, but after what I had been through for the past 10 weeks, it wasn't really astonishing that they weren't bothering me a whole lot. So anyways, they came in and checked me at like 11:30-ish that night, and I was a 5.
5. She said you were a 5, but close to a 6.
Yeah, a 5 to a 6, and asked if we wanted to break my water, which at that point I had started Pitocin at 7, so it had been a while. Right,
it'd been 4 hours.
Right. And so I said sure. Our doula decided that was, you know, the best plan. And so our thought process was when they broke my water that I would go quickly. And so they broke my water and they were sitting me up, and the pain was instant. I mean,
excruciating.
I went from totally being fine, thinking this is gonna take forever because I'm not even feeling hardly anything, to, oh my gosh, I know I planned on having a natural delivery, but I cannot do this. I need an epidural. So I made it through probably 30 or 45 minutes of contractions, not like on my own decision. It's just how long it took the anesthesiologist to get there. They were so painful, so painful. So the anesthesiologist gets there and starts, what do you mean, Bubba? Starts doing the epidural. So at one point she said, you know, where are you feeling it? And so I told her, I said, it feels like it's to the left. I can still feel the placement. Yeah. I can still feel all of my right side. So after her maneuvering things around and saying, well, it's gonna take probably 10 minutes for it to really take effect. And I thought, okay, fine. I'm just gonna suck it up and get through these contractions for 10 minutes. And when you're in that room, I swear you have no sense of time. Like, I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know how long things were taking. And so at one point I said, how much longer is this 10 minutes gonna take? And my doula looked at me and said, it's been 45 minutes. Like, you shouldn't be feeling anything.
Right.
And I was in a good bit of pain. I was in a lot of pain on my right side, especially. So between, let's just say 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., we were trying to figure out like what they needed to do to get my pain to go away.
So they rolled you on your right side to see if it would push the medicine to that side a little bit more. They gave you a little bit more in the epidural catheter, and that she still had the pain. And
at one point they gave me something that allowed me to have like 30 minutes of, I was still uncomfortable, but I wasn't in pain. Right. And then all of a sudden
you hit 7 centimeters.
8 centimeters. And they said, you know, you're going to be ready to push within an hour. I went from 5 to 6 to 8 centimeters in no time.
In no time.
And then at one point I was like, I was screaming at this point.
Right.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what changed, but essentially I just didn't have anything. Nothing, my left side was not numb anymore. The anesthesiologist kept like pinching me in different places and saying, you shouldn't be able to feel this, and I could feel everything. And at that point I was in so much pain and ready to start pushing that they, I guess, decided not to try to reposition
once they figured out that it was slightly into the left, you had already been pushing.
Okay, maybe that's
so. At that point, the doctor was like, "We can't."
And I would not have been able to stay still. There is 0% chance that I would have been able to stay still.
Well, and also the thing of it was, she was at 8 centimeters, but he had descended down the canal.
You could see
a long
head.
way. He was there, and she wasn't even like 10.
Right.
So they couldn't change her angle to get to adjust the epidural.
Yeah, that's true too.
So at that point it was, you're just gonna have to make it off of what we can give you in the time frame. So throughout the entire labor, throughout the entire pushing process, we had an anesthesiologist in the room who was just giving her doses of medicine by hand
to try to
reduce a little bit.
It was the most traumatizing hours of my life. I really did not know how I was going to keep going. And I'm so grateful that I had Derek, and at that point both of our birth doulas were there with us. But I felt so helpless to myself. I felt like everybody else was, not that they weren't willing to help me. I never asked for a C-section, but if anyone had offered it to me, I would have not even blinked. I would have taken it in a split second. Now that once he was born, we realized that there was more going on inside of me than what we realized, and I felt a little bit validated as to my pain. Once we decided that we were going to be induced, I knew that the chances of me having a natural delivery were not very high, because I knew that Pitocin made contractions worse. And so I went into it saying, I don't know when I'm going to get an epidural. If I make it all the way, great, but I'm assuming that at some point in time I'm gonna have to get one. And so when I, in my mind, gave in, which I don't think at all that having an epidural is the easy way out, you're still giving birth. But when in my mind I gave in to having an epidural, I had reached my wall of saying, I cannot feel this pain. So I want to enjoy this time. I want to enjoy his birth. I want to be present. I want to know when he's coming out. I want to be just in the moment and just, okay, I cannot deal with the pain, so let's just make it a good experience. And instead I got the absolute opposite. I was screaming bloody murder. I was like all of the probably movies that you see of people who are just cannot
ready to climb the wall.
Yeah, cannot take it. And even I knew that something was really wrong, because even in between the contractions, I was still in so much pain. I was in so much pain that I was pushing without contractions. Just to try to get him out. And so, you know, at this point we're all thinking he's a really big baby. Even the doctor that delivered me kept saying, you know, he must just be really big. He's got to be really big.
So you did a fantastic job. There was just, and you can tell more about it, but there was just his positioning and the way he was coming out. He was hung behind the pelvic ridge on the pelvic bone. So the way it was kind of like tilting his neck when he was coming out versus letting him just slide under. So the big part of it was getting his head under the pelvic bone to where he could come on out. And that also caused you a lot of pain, because the doctor had to stretch down further than was typically normal, where he could have a clear passage out.
Yeah. And so we finally, my doulas were so amazing. Derek he was so great through the whole thing. And so they finally realized that I needed, I don't know why they decided that I needed it, but they eventually got, what are they called?
The Rebozo.
Rebozo wraps.
You just needed leverage to come up over the contraction more, where she could push down.
And so I will insert pictures through this video. But Derek was standing behind the doctor and was pulling against me so that I had something to pull back against so that I could try to get this baby out. Like he was right there for so long, but I just could not get him out from behind my pelvic bone, and it was so excruciatingly painful. I mean, I'm talking like I can't even describe the pain, but it was so bad. So anyways, finally he came flying out. Once he got his head out from behind the pelvic bone, his entire head, body, and feet were out.
Right.
I mean, the doctor almost did not catch him.
Well, you pushed without a contraction, so the doctor wasn't ready, and he cleared the pelvic bone, and like she had to like cap him and catch him, not like I'm ready, let's go. Right. But he did. He came out head, shoulder, body all in one push.
And I'll try to find some pictures that somewhat show it. We just didn't take pictures of it. But his entire head was, you can see that it was coned pretty badly. But it was so black from bruising, and he had a very deep laceration on his head from where he was hitting my pelvic bone.
Right, and that's where his head was being angled versus being able to slide out. It was catching on the pelvic bone, and it lacerated it, and then it caused all the bruising because part of his head was trying to come on out, but it couldn't.
So once everybody saw that, it was like, oh, I don't think anyone doubted how much pain I was in, but I felt like my doctor was like, thought that I just had no pain tolerance.
Right.
Thought that even with an epidural, I was screaming and in that much pain.
Right.
Whereas if I had not had an epidural, maybe she would have said, oh, well, you have a reason to be screaming because this hurts a lot.
Right.
And so once he came out, I felt like the doctor and the nurses were like, oh.
He came out.
And
then that's really when the trauma started too.
We did delayed cord clamping, and they let his cord go for like 3 or 4 minutes because of other stuff that was going on. But Derek was able to cut the cord. He stayed, from what other people tell me, on my chest for 20 or 30 minutes. It felt to me like it was a split second. Now looking back at our birth pictures, I can see that it was, you know, it was a more substantial amount of time. All that I can remember is the warmth of his butt and leg up against this part of my arm that I was holding him onto my stomach with. Like I can vividly remember that feeling and just being like, he's here, like he's okay. We're actually gonna take him home, because I didn't know until that point. I kept saying, like, I just want to get to the hospital because then the monitors are on me and I know that if something goes wrong, they're going to be able to save him. And so I was more sure when we got there, but actually, like, having him
in your arm
there was like, it was really emotional. And you can see that by the pictures that we have of, like, both of us were just really emotional over the whole thing. So anyways, I had a 2nd-degree tear, which they said was not bad at all. And so as she was stitching me up,
so after the delivery, when she delivered the placenta, there was a lot of blood coming out. There was a lot of bleeding, and it was active bleeding. It wasn't just pooled blood. So she did have a 2nd-degree tear. The doctor worked really quickly to repair the tear, to make sure that's where the bleeding wasn't coming from. And then it was still bleeding. And that was... in a split second, all of a sudden, everything was like, wait a minute, you're bleeding a lot. Let's take the baby, let's clear the room out. They made both of our doulas leave, and then a million people filled into the room. They made the doulas leave, and then she worked on it for 10-15 minutes trying to find the bleed. She couldn't find the bleed. She tried to call for another attending, but all of the attendings were in surgery. So then there was a midwife there who came and helped her, and the midwife was fantastic, keeping Elizabeth really calm through the situation. But it was getting really dicey at the amount of blood loss that she had lost. And at that point, there was so much chaos of trying to find where the bleeding was coming from. No one had an actual count of the blood volume that was lost.
All right, and we're back after we found another memory card.
Yeah, our memory card is full. So they realized that I was bleeding a lot.
Right.
Now, also keep in mind that because I did not have an epidural, essentially, that this doctor was putting her entire hand and half of her forearm into my uterus to try to scrape the blood clots and other stuff out of me, and was doing it repeatedly, and it was almost worse than the pain of the contractions and labor. And so that at that point, because of the pain that I had been in for essentially the last 5 hours, there were spurts of time in the first like 2 hours that I had a little bit of a break. But because of that, I think it wore on me even more. And I also just kept reminding myself through the labor of like, once he's here, the pain is going to stop, and I'll just be able to enjoy him. Because I felt like I did not enjoy my labor and delivery at all. I was like an animal, pretty much.
Yeah.
I was just in so much pain. I was sobbing, I was screaming,
Right.
I was begging for someone to help me. And so at that point when he came out, and I was not, at that point they took him because they needed to try to
Right.
essentially save my life. It was like my mindset just went out the window.
And in all reality, we're not trying to be dramatic by saving her life. They literally worked on it for a good hour to hour and 15 minutes. And the doctor said at 75 minutes, I've got to make a decision on what's going on. And she, at that point, had called rapid response, which is the code team. And
started talking about taking me to
taking
the
her
OR.
to the OR, and she called anesthesiology and told them to bring, like, they had everything that they needed to for in half a second. If they needed to put her out and get her to the OR, they were going. Everyone was there.
And keep in mind that as someone who is a part of the infertility and adoption community, which a lot of times are very intertwined because of people going through infertility and turning to adoption, I know personally a lot of people who have had to have hysterectomies because they lost so much blood they couldn't get the bleeding to stop, and so they had to do a hysterectomy. And so not only did I just have a very traumatic labor and delivery, I just had a very traumatic hour and a half of this doctor's arm inside of me. My baby was not with me. He was crying over in the corner. All I wanted to do was be able to comfort him. And now I'm thinking,
Right.
I'm gonna lose my uterus, maybe my life. And I wasn't ever really concerned about like dying. Like, I really wasn't. I felt like I was in a safe place. I felt like the doctors were there. They were aware of everything. And so, you know, if worse came to worse, they would do a hysterectomy and that would stop the bleeding.
Right.
And so they were finally able to put
They put a Baccarat balloon in it. So essentially, they just put a balloon in there, filled it with some liquid where it would tamponade or put pressure against the entire uterus and stop the bleeding because of the pressure.
Right.
Which that worked. However, when that happened, because at this point, like, everyone knows that if you had an epidural, you also have a Foley. So they had taken that out already. So they had to put that back in because the ball was going to be so big that she technically can't get up. And then we were actually in our room for how long? Maybe an hour, hour and a half. And they moved her down to the WICU unit, which is the women's ICU unit, where they could keep an eye on the bleeding.
We also had a not very nice nurse
Take over
after the labor and delivery, which at this point, once they got the bleeding stopped and I realized that I was going to be okay, she kept worrying that he was too cold, and so she took him from me it was a long time. And he's just screaming. Derek was over there with him, which I was grateful for that. But one of the doulas just stood with me and I just sobbed because the morning had been so much. And all I wanted to do was to hold my baby and to be able to comfort him, and I could just hear him screaming. And all I wanted to do was scream because I didn't even know what was happening. And so that was just, it was just a really bad, like, not ending to the day because it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. But we were able to FaceTime with Ellie, which made me feel so much better. And even like through the delivery, we have a camera that we can check on our phones. And so of course she was sleeping, but I kept asking Derek, I was like, just let me see her, because I felt like she was the only anchor that I had to like the outside world of like life continuing to be good and continuing to be like normal life. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it just felt like in that room it was like a torture chamber.
Right. I will say other than the heart rate scare because of the monitors being bad when we first got there, there wasn't ever really a scare that he was in danger.
No,
he never
he was
decelled.
fine.
He never, like, he was fine through the entire labor process. It was just, when they couldn't get the bleeding to stop, it was scary for her, like, her life and her well-being. And then it was just traumatic. Also for me because, like, she's bleeding out. I'm using that term, but like losing large amounts of blood. And then someone has him, and I can't be in both places at once. And I know he was fine. Like, his Apgars were perfect. He cried when he came out. He was breathing. Like, so I sacrificed the first hour, and I was with her the entire time the doctor was working on her, which I'm absolutely okay with that because I knew he was fine. But it was a very difficult, and then, like she said, the nurse that took over at the 7 a.m. shift swap was just, not mean, she was just very blunt and not overly caring, and she was not doula friendly. Like, she was like, only your husband can be in the room.
Which at that point I needed their support more than, I mean, I needed all three of their support. At one point I just said, they're coming in here. Like, I don't know how to tell you this nicely, but it's what I need.
So that was tough. We finally got everything calmed down.
Yeah, that night when they let me leave the women's ICU unit and actually go up to postpartum, they had to get the balloon out, and in order to do that, they had to let out like 100 cc's. There were 300 in it, 100 cc's every 2 hours. And so that was a long process. And then they had to watch my bleeding for a while after that. And
it just took so long to get to a normal after.
And I was so traumatized by the amount of pain that I had been in that morning that every single time someone came in to do just a routine thing, I wanted to scream and run out of the room because I was so terrified of being hurt again.
Right.
And when they took the balloon out, it was painful. When they took my catheter out, it was so painful. Standing up for the first time, I mean, all of the things that happened in that evening were probably just normal things. The battery's gonna die now.
Well, let's finish it quickly.
Were probably just normal things to happen. But I was so terrified. I mean, we got up to postpartum and I just cried because I was so drained. I had all of these emotions raging because I had just given birth to a baby and it had not gone in any way, shape, or form the way that I had thought that it might even go. I had all of these like beautiful ideas of my birth, and I felt like all of them were taken from me by one way or another, by some person, or I was so grateful that he was happy and healthy. But I just felt broken. Like, I felt like I was just broken. And I feel like I put a lot of pressure on the situation also because we waited for so long. Like, I kept saying, like, biology does not matter to me. I just want to be able to experience pregnancy and I want to experience childbirth. Like, I really wanted to. And so I finally had that. Like, I finally got to that place, and it was just so traumatic. Yeah. And so it's taken me a long time. It's been 3.5 weeks, but I'm still working through it. I'm still processing through it. One thing that has helped a little bit has just been claiming it as my birth story and claiming it as his birth story, and just saying, like, it is what it is. Like, it was what it was, and there's no way for me to go back and change that. There's no way for me to make it different. Getting pregnant and giving birth again is not going to change his birth story. Because for several days I was like, I just need to get pregnant again. I need to get pregnant again so we can go through it again, so I can make it better next time, so that I can get some kind of redemption out of this whole thing. And I still, like, I want to experience pregnancy again. I want to experience giving birth again. And I hope that next time it will be better.
Yeah.
But it may not be. And again, even if it is better, it's not going to change what happened with him. And so I've tried to focus more on just saying, like, that was my birth story. And there are no things to measure it up against. It's just what his birth story was, and it was hard and it was painful, and it was very symbolic of the 9.5 years that it took to get pregnant and to have him and to bring Ellie home, and you know, like, just the pain and the things not going the way that you think that they're going to go, but then also at the end of it getting this little guy. So I don't really know what else to say about it. But yeah, still working through it, obviously. And probably always will be. I feel like there will always be, you know, things that I have to process through and things that are gonna hurt. And I'm sure, Lord willing, if there is a next time, that there will probably be a lot of fear going into another birth. But I am grateful. I am so grateful that I got to experience it for all that it was. I know what a gift it is to be able to experience it, and I hope that no one ever sees this as me complaining or being ungrateful for what I have, because I am so grateful for the ways that both of our kids made their way to us. And if I don't ever get to do it again, I will still be so grateful that I got this chance. I have a lot of friends and acquaintances that have not gotten to have this chance yet, and so I do not take a second of my hard pregnancy or hard labor and delivery for granted. That's the story of getting this little guy into the world. He was worth every single pain. He's snoring right now. And we just love him so much. We loved him so much, and one of the first things that we said to each other when he came out was, he looks just like Ellie. Yeah. And he does. They favor each other. But everybody always says that Ellie looks like Derek, and then everyone says that he looks like Derek. So I think that's why, you know, I'm not even a part of this equation. Out of the four of us, I'm the one that doesn't look like anyone. I definitely see myself in him.
I do too.
I see myself in Ellie too, though. So, but yeah. Hopefully this was not too long and rambly, but
that's our story.
That's our story. Again, this little guy. But
we'll get this up on maybe a Wednesday.
Yeah, hopefully.
This should be up on a Wednesday, and then there may be a vlog on a Friday following it. But until then,
yeah.
See ya.
If we have comments, you can leave any questions that you have in the comments. If we do not have comments back, then you can go to our Instagram page, Derek and Liza, and comment there or send us a message. But we will see you guys next time. Bye.